So the reason why Source exists first at the onset is that it has been created with the multilateral development banks that you see on the screen in order to empower governments on developing their infrastructure projects. So it's a software, so that's why it has been developed. How can, digitally speaking, a tool can support the development on investable infrastructure pipeline. The board of the platform is composed of the MDBs that you see on the screen. So they are my bosses. And we are a non-for-profit located in Geneva. And we are implementing the platform on behalf of the MDBs. It's going to concern you because this is something that you're going to have to face in the countries where we are implementing the platform. And you will see that we are in most of the countries that are here today. Regarding the benefits of the platform, it has been identified with 3 main pillars that we have actually developed a practice guide with the South African presidency for the G20 this year. And the practice guide is about 3 pillars. One, what we have seen in order to be able to have pipeline of investable project is a government needs to have the data that is collected systematically. Funny enough, 90% of the G20 members collect the data semi-manually, meaning PDF, words, emails, documents. We haven't seen one country to have an end-to-end software that is covering the infrastructure project lifecycle, except where Source is being used, but we will come to that. And interoperability of systems, we have seen that most of the ministries, and I'm sure you have seen that, they work in silos. The data doesn't flow seamlessly between the different ministries. That's unfortunate because then you don't have near real-time data, but also you're going to have data asymmetry, data gap. We have seen in one country, for example, I will not mention it, 16,000 apps in the government. They are not connected with one another. They are working in silos. So the data is not shared, which is difficult to be in a position to make informed decisions. And lastly, one size fits all doesn't work. As government, you all have different tasks, processes, laws. So it has to be also customized at the country level if there is a solution that is digital that is chosen. So those are the 3 pillars that we have developed at the practice guide. It has been warmly endorsed at the Infrastructure Working Group, the G20, a month ago, and it's going to the finance ministers on July 18th for the G20 meeting. Because it's a software, we had to find a way in order to meet the regulations that the countries have when it comes to data sovereignty, data immunity. So what we do is we have a special partnership with the United Nations International Computing Center. So it's a UN agency that is offering IT services, for example, hosting data for international organizations. So this is through them that we are working. What I'm showing you is a report that the Asian Development Bank has created mentioning the fact that the data is under the property of the country, but also under UN privileges and immunities. So that was necessary in order to work with most of the countries that we are working with. So Source is recognized as G20, G7, BRICS, APEC. So this is the organization or the fora that we work with. In terms of where we are, this is maybe more interesting. The countries in dark blue, like Brazil, South Africa, Angola, Tanzania, Egypt, Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, Indonesia, this is where Source has been implemented. For example, in Indonesia, we work through BAPENAS and the Joint PPP office. Or in Brazil, we work through PPI, which is the program for investment at Casa Civil under the presidency. And also in South Africa, we work with the Treasury and ISA, Infrastructure South Africa. So those are the entities usually that we work with. And that is now being used. We have 17 countries that are using Source that are at the pilot phase, and a lot that are also ongoing in blue. You can see that France is also using Source at the subnational level. Why? Because subnational authorities in France, Germany, and Canada, they don't necessarily have the expertise to manage complex PPP projects. So they need to have kind of an online guidance, and the pilot that we are doing in France is actually very successful. Germany is looking at to do the same thing with at the lender level. So we are working not with KfW, but we are working with BMF. And Partnerschaft Deutschland, for those that are from Germany that I've seen. And Canada, it's at the provincial level. So that there is one province that we are preparing, but there were elections, if you are aware, so now we are waiting to have the go-ahead. And we have more demand than we can supply. So that's one of the issues that we have. It's a public good. There is no cost for government. That's why also we are always working with the MDBs in order to make sure we can have more donors to meet the demand. The standard implementation of the platform now is very clear. We basically look at what countries have, meaning the tasks, processes, systems. Sometimes they have very efficient systems when it comes to project management, or even the use of AI, and Rwanda is a good example. So we are basically looking at what's the landscape. And then we look at what are the needs from the country, and then we customize the platform accordingly. Because as I said, one size fits all doesn't work. So I will show you quickly what it looks like. And as I said, we have 17 countries at the pilot phase, and most of them now have passed the training phase and online support. So it's a web application. It's available on any browser. And you need, of course, a login and a password. Because as I said, it's the government's tool. It's your tool. No one can access it. But once it is implemented, then the different government officials have a login and a password. What I'm going to show you here is an example of Brazil. They are not real projects because for obvious reasons we don't have access to the projects, but just want to show you some functionalities. For example, systematic data collection. As a user, let's say that I'm a project officer from the Ministry of Transport, I can connect to the platform and I can see the project that I'm involved in. There's also all the platform that is translated in different languages. So all the languages that you see on the top right corner is basically where we are working. And you can also see the different tasks and notification and dashboard that you have as an individual in order to be able to look at your project. When we've done that, the ministers and vice ministers and directors of agencies, they said we will need to have that at the country level. So what we did is a high-level official can connect and see the entire portfolio inside the ministry or inside the country. So what you see is a dashboard of SDGs. So the objective is also to show how quantitatively the pipeline is aligned with the SDGs from a ministerial or country perspective, and to also have different type of KPIs. Now, creating a project is fairly simple. So you have a few questions that are being asked in order to select the type of project. So there is a sector, subsector. So we have 40 subsector templates, so basically different type of questions. Also unsolicited project proposal that was done with PIAF from the World Bank. Those are the 40 subsectors. So we have developed that with the countries where we are working because sometimes we didn't have some subsectors, so we developed them with them. And when we have a new request, we basically work with the private sector in order to identify what technically should be developed in order to develop this type of new template. Once the project is created, then as the, let's say, Ministry of Transport, I land on the project page. So what you see in the middle, the definition, qualification, studies here. So this is the timeline of Brazil. So we basically customize the platform with the specificities of the country. So there are different steps, as you can see here. So some countries it's only 4, some countries it's 5. In Indonesia, I don't remember exactly. And then you have different parameters that you see on the left here, that are, again, specific to the country. So if you look at, for example, in Brazil, you're going to have the different public development banks, the BNDES, I'm sure you know of. And also, what is the level of the project, because you have different states, sometimes federated states, and even in South Africa, the municipalities, they need a lot of support. And usually, most of the projects are coming from the subnational level as well. And then what it does, it basically, based on the parameters of the project, then it creates different tasks. And it's basically a step-by-step process that the country is going through. So for example, you can see here the task, who it is assigned to, the organization, start date, end date. Very simple project management tool. It's Asana type, or Microsoft project, or other type of tasks. The thing is that it's not common in governments to have that across ministries. And again, the objective is to make sure that from one ministry to another, all the different tasks they have to go through is actually digitalized, and then they just have to go through a step-by-step process. So who are the users of the platform? Well, it's usually the project officers from the different line ministries, because that's where the data is coming from. Sometimes it goes through the Ministry of Planning, like in Indonesia, it goes through Bappenas, because the requests, they go through the planning, then they go through the process, and then MOF is involved, and the others are also involved. In South Africa, the projects are sent to ISA, Infrastructure South Africa, that is under the presidency, but the projects are coming from the line ministries, and then ISA validates a project if they are priority project or not. But then Treasury is also involved at some point. In Brazil, it's both, from the line ministries, but also from the presidency at PPI. So usually it's project officers, but then sometimes in countries you have gates when the project has to be approved to go to the next step. Does it answer your question?
I'm from the DBSA, and we also fund projects in preparation. And some of those projects we partner with whichever respective department that wants to, let's say, eventually issue an RFP for PPP, and we would fund some of the development work. I just wanted to find out, is this something that could be useful for us as DBSA to monitor the progress of that project, so that we see what is happening on the other side, at government side as well? Because often we rely on the steercos, to get updates, and it'll be good if we can sort of have, viewing rights or whatever to this, because we also have a vested interest in the progress of such projects as well. Thanks.
It's a good point, and as you know, South Africa is going to go through a major restructuring when it comes to infrastructure, with a merge of different departments. So we are waiting for that to happen, which should happen like next March. But in the meantime, we are basically working with Treasury, ISA, to move forward, because there is a new platform that will be launched by ISA in August, and we want to connect with them and also work with Treasury. To answer your question, yes, definitely public development banks, PPPs, should have access to the platform invited by the line ministries, because this is where transparency inside the government is key. Not outside, but inside. And you play a major role when it comes to infrastructure in South Africa, and even Southern Africa. But the point, if we look at South Africa, yes, you should have access to it. This is something that we promote also with Bappenas, but Bappenas also in Indonesia, they have the PPP joint office, so PTSMI is also involved. So that's why some countries it's easier to be able to connect to others. But maybe what is nice here is maybe there is some request that you can send to me, and then we connect with the people in South Africa, and then we can have a chat. But this is the objective, is to highlight what is being implemented, the success that we are facing with the countries, and then how we can make it more efficient for the PBBs. So the series of questions that we have, what we have to do is to align them to the source questions. You remember the templates, the 40 subsector templates? So what we do is we merge them to make sure that when you go through a project, then you're not only going through your task, but you're also going through what investors are expecting to see when projects are publicly tendered. It can be governance, cost, technical, or legal questions. You can see that the type of questions we have are numerical, multiple choices, proposed answers, and also sometimes we have international best practices embedded into it. Why? For example, here the IFC performance standards, but the objective is to provide some knowledge and guidance at the right juncture, because project officers have tons of reports they have to read, and a lot of knowledge from our fellows, from the donors or multilateral development banks. They are great, but they are on the shelf, and you have to find the info exactly when you are preparing the project. So, for example, what is an NPV? How do I do a CBS? Or how do I do traffic forecast? All of these are available somewhere, but you have to find them. So the objective here is to make them available at the right juncture. So these are some of the international best practices that we have digitalized into Source. So then when you are using it, then you can access these international best practices. This is where Source is a bit unique. So the templates that I was referring to, they've been created by the private sector. And the private sector has shared around 6,000 comments in order to be able to create those 8,000 comments to create those 40 subsector templates. And you can see that it varies from the actors, contractors that are not only interested in PPPs, but also traditional procurement, but also investors, asset managers, financiers, advisors, etc. So this is important because it creates a common language between the public sector and the private sector. Source also covers the operation and maintenance. Why? Because your project preparation cycle is going to last maybe 12, 18 months. Then you're going to have a 6-month, 1 year of tender, and then you're going to have 20 plus years of maintenance. So the objective is to make sure that the data can also be collected at this stage in order to make sure that you can at some point do ex post, ex ante type of analytics. Because the only way that you can improve is that you can measure. And the objective here is to collect the data and you can know what you can do with the data that you are collected. This is something that we have seen at the G20 is that they all collect data, but they don't know what to do with the huge amount of data that they have. One thing that we had to do is interoperability of systems at the beginning when I was telling you that ministries are working in silos and they don't necessarily share data. For example, Ministry of Transport, myself, I can invite different colleagues, like a manager from different ministries and agencies with different rights and permissions. Compartmentalization is needed, and that is an opportunity to provide different rights, as you were saying, from DBSA as a viewer, for example. But this is where you can have it. So the objective was to make sure that everyone can access the same information at the right time. But you can also invite consultants, private sector, investors, MDBs, donors, whatever. It's your platform as a government. And you can, again, give different rights and permissions. Again, the objective here is to make sure to have one simple rule. Everyone has access to the same information. And to make sure that it is near real time. And that is the only way to have quality data. Yeah,
so it does mean that this specific member to be invited has no access, no reading rights to public consultation field, right?
The stages are here on the left.
Yeah.
Oh yes, public consultation, you're right, sorry. So public consultation, it means that the person don't have access to the stage public consultation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Then when we've done that, the government said it's great, but your questions are difficult to answer. So what we did is a matchmaking between project preparation facilities, for example, here the ones that are available in South Africa, in Brazil, and then the government can contact any of them. And the objective is to facilitate the work of the project officers, because when they said, well, it's difficult to answer your question, the easy answer to us was, why don't you ask your local development bank or your national development bank or the multilateral development bank that is there? And they said, well, we don't know who to contact. And that was interesting because not everyone knows who they have to contact. So that's why we did this project preparation facility finder. And for example, the GIF, the Global Infrastructure Facility from the World Bank, the government can see which stage they are going to support, and then they can contact them directly. So that creates a matchmaking between the project preparation facilities and the governments that are trying to answer the questions. And then when we've done that, the government said, oh, it's great. However, those PPPs do not have enough funding in order to support the project preparation of the hundreds or thousands of projects that governments have. And we can see that in all public development banks, you don't have all the resources to support the project preparation of all the projects in the country, which is logical. So the objective was, how can we provide more support to the government officers while going through the project lifecycle? So for example, what we did is we worked with the G20 and we looked at the different risks that are identified, that should be identified during project preparation. but also managed and addressed. Why? Because 80% or maybe more of projects in Africa do not reach financial close because of poor project preparation, because the risks were not properly allocated, managed, and addressed. So the objective here is, while they're answering their questions, then they're going to have red flags. So for example, here, land availability. There are multiple people working on a project, and someone says that the risk on land availability is shared. But this risk should be borne by the public sector. Construction risk, it should be borne by the private sector. There can be exceptions, yes, but at least the government is aware of what are the best practices in order to make sure that when the project is tendered, they know exactly how they are aligned with such and such methodology and be prepared to answer any questions by the private sector. And when we've done that, the government said, great, but we also have our own methodology to assess projects. And that happens in all governments. In Brazil, it's called the 5-case model here, which is basically also the same in South Africa. And it's going to evolve. We're going to have the green book, I've been told. And then the project fact sheet, which is really specific to a go, no-go internal process of the government of Brazil. So what we did, we just made a matchmaking between their criteria and our questions, so that while they are doing their studies and reports and assessments and going through the platform, then automatically they will be able to see how the answers are attached to what they need. And then they can do a manual go, no-go type of process. So this is what it looks like in Brazil. So you're going to have their different criteria on the left, the completion on the right, and what they decided to score the answers to. And they decided to use traffic light. So you can see here that another project assessment that we basically align to the source questions. When the project is ready for tender, or whatever the jurisdiction is requesting for, or requesting the government to do, it can be right from the beginning because of the law that it's a PPP, it has to be publicly available right away. The government can publish the project. What does that mean is that the government decides when it is publicly available and what is publicly available. So it can be assessments, documents, contact information. So there are different ways to publish the different information of the project. So that's infrastructure South Africa. So projects coming from source. That is Ecuador, same. That is Uzbekistan, and that is Tanzania. So that's basically the way that we also connect the different platforms together to make sure that when a project is published, it is available on the platform of the country. But they can also have e-procurement systems. They can also have project management systems. So we do this interoperability as well to make sure there is no double data entry, because double data entry is a killer. It's going to be used once, twice, but definitely afterwards it will not be used. And that's the pipeline of Kazakhstan. I repeated it that many times, but you can only improve what you measure. That's definitely something that should be something that we constantly ask ourselves, because it helps to make sure that we can identify how do I measure. But in order to measure, you're going to need the data. But the data, if it's kept in silos, if it's not updated regularly, you will never be in a position to measure. Now, a summary of the G20 work that we have been conducting. 90%, we had 90% response rate from the G20, which was quite amazing. It was the first time I was seeing that at the G20 since 2018, since I participate. And as I said, it's going to be presented at the FMCBG. So the FMCBG is the Finance Ministers and Central Bank Governors meeting that will happen on July 18th. The key findings, I've already mentioned that to you, but I can keep them just for your information. And then I can stop there and ask or answer questions, if you have.
So you mentioned the work you're doing with Infrastructure SA. Are you doing anything with the JET PMU on the country platform side? I know they're busy working on a pipeline of initiatives, so I was just wondering, as a matter of interest, if there's anything you're doing with them. Thanks.
Yeah, no, definitely a matter of interest. It's just maybe the complexity of JETP programs. We go where the governments are asking us to go. And so far, they haven't asked us to go to the JETPs. But there would definitely be a benefit, as DBSA was mentioning, the lady at the back, on more transparency of the data. So yeah, it should be done. It's just that sometimes countries are not necessarily prioritizing it. They may be waiting more from donors to get them to support the process of the JETPs. Country platforms, definitely. So as you can see, Source is kind of a country platform, but it's digital, not country platform as the World Bank presents it. But yeah, the experience that we have is it reinforces the communication between the different ministries, and that's why the donors are supporting us, because it basically just creates more clarity at the base. So that's yeah.
Two questions actually. When you talk about private partners, are they financially involved, and do they have access to all the data, and can they contribute to the data collection? And then my other question regarding your last point about linked to JETP. So the government is the one choosing which project they want to enter into the platform, and the one they prefer not to share. Is that or can they choose, or do they put everything?
So the first question is no. We work with the private sector, as you have seen the logos on the screen, but they don't fund anything. We want to stay neutral. We are a public good, and the governance that we have, there is a reputational risk of the MDBs to support us. And what we are discussing though with the private sector is what should we develop further on the platform so that you as a private sector is interested to finance these projects. So we are discussing different functionalities like a barometer, like what are the minimum criteria that the private sector would like to see before a project is being published. So meaning that, is it 70% of the question that should be answered? Should there be a third-party advisor? Should there be a PBB involved? Should all the risk inside Source on the risk allocation should all be addressed? So these are the parameters that we are going through with them, and we should have more clarity around September, October on this barometer. So this is what we ask them, but the data, they will not access it unless they are invited by someone or when it is publicly available. But it doesn't mean that we will not try to find ways to sell memberships to the private sector on, for example, when a project is publicly available, then they can receive an email alert saying, oh, by the way, the project in South Africa on energy is available, then you can go and see it. This is something that they are interested in because they want to be informed of projects with certain criteria. The barometer criteria that I was mentioning, but also the sector, the subsector, the location, the capex. So these are criteria that they are interested in. In terms of the projects, no, the government put all the projects on it because they want to have everything into one platform. So definitely some JETP projects are on it, but are they using Source with the donors on a JETP project? For the moment, we are not aware of that.
My question would be if there are any like automated checks regarding the quality of data, because what we see sometimes is not only like poor standardization, but also like super unrealistic timelines, unrealistic budgets, sometimes old or outdated information. And I was wondering whether this is maybe even incorporated there, that you see have some automatic checks or like alert be saying like, hi, sorry, your budget is unrealistic or something.
Yeah, and again, for all type of project, but if we stick to the clean energy project, because that's the conference about, what we have is consistency checks. So for example, here on the right side, they're gonna be smart algorithm comparing data between them. Is the capex always the same? And I want to meet the SDG 5 on gender balance, but they didn't do a social impact assessment. Something is inconsistent. or the economic internal rate of return is below the discount rate or the hurdle rate. Something is inconsistent. Same with the risk allocation. They're going to be like automatic checks. And the way that we have seen through the G20 interview process is that quality data is not only defined by someone with the expertise to validate the data. It's also by the ability of the person entering the data to trust that what the person is putting it or inside the platform is valid. Why? Because they know that everyone's going to see their name attached to the answer. And what we have done is we ask governments to go through a methodology. It's a fast infra label. Maybe you've heard about the fast infra label. And the fast infra label is digitalized into source, so it's a methodology. And the government was supposed to answer the different questions, and then to see how much answers they can, how many questions they can answer. The result is that they were saying some questions like, what was the gender balance during the public stakeholder consultation? They never asked the question, and even if they asked, they don't know what the answer is. So the behavior of the person was not to answer the question, because they didn't want to put a fake answer. So what we realize indirectly is that when you have accountability and transparency within a team, the quality of data is going up. Why? Because what is in it, the person trusts it's a good answer. It doesn't mean it's a good answer, but at least the person will be able to justify why the answer is X or Y and Z. And when you don't have an answer to a question, it's also interesting because a question that is not answered is an answer in itself. So that's why we were able to identify what are the different functionalities that we should develop in order to increase the quality of the data. But it is basically done through accountability and transparency.
Are there any industrial country members of the G20 adopting that as well?
Yeah, so I was, I think, sharing. I'm going to go back to the map. So France at the subnational level, Germany, we are working with Partnerschaft Deutschland and BMF to identify a lender or a city to do a pilot, so that's ongoing, and also in Canada. So G7, but yeah, from the G20, again, it's usually the G7, apart from, of course, Australia.
I mean, not sure if you are able or willing to share, but how much does it cost to implement such a system?
Oh, you know, it's publicly available.
Oh, okay.
It's 300,000 euros to implement the platform in a country. It's usually a 12-month program. And what we are working now with the German government is to extend the assistance. Because what we realize is that once the platform is implemented, then you have so many trainings to do, so many follow-ups, so many people to talk to, and there's a need for clarity, new people, and people that are changing from one ministry to another, change of government. Oh my gosh, it's a nightmare. But what we see is that because we're a public good, we continue to support them. That's why we have a post-integration support. For example, in Indonesia, I think the technical assistance finished like last year, but we continue to work with them. South Africa, 2 years ago, finished, but we continue to work with them on a daily basis. So what we realize is that we should at least have a plus 1 year after the technical assistance. So we estimate that we haven't tested it yet. We are doing it with GIZ in Senegal. So we are implementing Source in Senegal now. And I'm going to Senegal beginning of August to launch the platform with the government. And we are expecting to at least maybe a year support after the implementation. We estimated roughly 150,000 euros, but also for the local consultant, because we always work with a local consultant. So now I would say 450,000 euros for 2 years. We compared ourselves with other consultancies, and we are 4 times lower. But the thing is, the reason why we can be lower is because we are doing at cost. And we also do not outsource the IT development. everything in IT is inside the team. So we don't outsource anything, and that's where we also save costs. I also have some words on AI before the end.
Just a question on some of your focus areas on the infrastructure. I was just looking at the sectors. I think there's a strong, at least from a climate perspective, mitigation kind of focus. I just wanted to understand in terms of climate resilient infrastructure to what extent. I know that falls under the ambit of sustainable infrastructure, but in terms of the specific areas there, I don't know if there would be any adaptation or resilience kind of focus interventions, or is it more mitigation focused?
I see we don't have, for us, well, I think it's logical, but adaptation and resilience is not a subsector. Adaptation and resilience should be involved in all the subsector. So what we have is questions on resilience and adaptation in all the templates in all the sectors. So this is how we have drafted it. So we have, for example, wait here. So we have environmental questions, and this is where we have also a climate section in order to make sure that those questions are properly addressed. And the reason we are not doing it because we are working with the MDBs, we work with the insurance industry. And the insurance industry has involved a lot of time in reviewing the templates. Why? Because they want to make sure that a project that is insurable is a project that is investable. But to make sure that the project is insurable, they need to make sure that the climate risks, health and safety and fire, contractors management, all these risks have been addressed. And there is a insurance coverage checklist in the platform to make sure that at least the government knows from an insurance perspective where do they stand. And we did that because we work with the 14 countries in the Pacific Islands. So Asian Development Bank is going to fund the integration in those 14 islands, and they need resilience. So that's why we wanted to make sure that the Zurich, the Swiss Re, WTW and others, they were validating the need first for such a platform and then a dedicated tool to make sure that insurance is covered so that the projects can be insured and make sure that you can attract the proper investors.
I very much like this statement because I've been working on climate disaster risk financing and insurance for the past 12 years or so. So do you already include the assessment of the physical risks in that module and basically maybe link to assessment platforms from the insurance company, insurance industry, reinsurance industry, that gives you basically the geographical climate risks over the lifetime of the assets to be financed, for example?
Yes, of course we are not there yet because SURE started to be implemented in the first country in 2022. Yeah, and we have this insurance coverage module. So then it shows from the different perspective how the insurance coverage has been addressed to make sure that, again, from an investor's perspective, they know that on the lifetime of the asset, it is being covered even during operation and maintenance. But that's going to be the exciting part about collecting the data and enabling the government to be able to compute that and to see what's going on.
I have a question on the potential support from the MDBs. Is it integrated, like available technical assistance or grant that could possibly be aligned with the project that is already listed?
Yeah, so the way that we work with the MDBs is usually, well, it's only grants. So we don't have concessional grants, we only receive grant funding. And the way that, where they are taking it is usually from an existing project through a technical assistant or a trust fund. And then they justify, because SURE is about SDGs, it's about digitalization, it's about cybersecurity, it's about governance improvement. So there are many checks that cover source, so that's how they justify taking the funding from different TAs or TF trust funds. Does that answer your question?
Like, for instance, because it's very comprehensive, right? Like you like to, in the source, you want to take step by step all the project preparation from the very beginning until the COD. Just wondering if the platform also covers any, I don't know, like potential support and concessional loan, grants from the MDBs like ADB, SECO, World Bank, that could possibly support the project itself, that we can tap into that. Because sometimes it's not available, sometimes it has to be with person to person, right? But if whether the platform can possibly provide that as well.
It's not there yet, but it has been a request from countries. And what we are planning to do is to discuss with the MDBs how we could do that. So for example, on the specificities of the project, the location, the CapEx, the answers to the questions, then we are thinking of doing something similar to the Project Preparation Facility Finder, and to do the same with the financing tools or financing mechanisms of the MDBs. So if you have that type of project, you are eligible for this, this, and that, but it is not done yet. So one thing on my side is when you look at digital tools and data, then maybe you're going to think about analytical tools like AI. And I'd like to have a few minutes on AI. The reason is that AI sounds great for things that are very specific, like simple outputs. For example, automatic driving or self-driving, transport, or energy, or healthcare, logistics. But when it comes to a very large output and the AI has to analyze something and provide a general feedback, AI, for the moment, has not shown very strong results. And I think when you look at the need for AI is one that is about data quality. You cannot have AI without data quality. Data quality, again, comes back to what I was saying on systematic data collection, interoperability, etc. So I will not repeat the presentation. But that is very important to remind. And second, countries, you have laws on where the data is hosted. And when you talk about AI, you need the cloud. There are only two countries that can provide a sovereign cloud with AI, the US and China. Unfortunately, that's it. In Europe, they are trying. Very difficult. So I just want to show that in clean energy, definitely there are things, if you look at a very specific project with simple output, AI can be helpful. But once you start enlarging the scope of the result, then the AI will become less and less relevant because we'll make connections less and less relevant. And you don't have an AI today that can go on the internet, analyze everything, and come back with the right answer. It doesn't exist. We are not at the AGI world, the artificial general intelligence. So we are not there yet. And the reason why I can talk about it is because we are assessing what we're going to do with Source. Today, we are testing a new platform that we're going to launch in September and to have all the projects migrated in November. And it will be a new source, and there will be some AI in it, potentially. We are testing now what we call a POV and a POC, proof of concept, and then proof of value. And it will be on translation. Very simple, very straightforward. Data that is collected inside Source and data that is validated. Very simple. Now, during the November event, we're going to ask our users, we're going to make all them travel to Geneva for 2 days, and we're going to ask them what type of benefits or functionalities you would like to see out of Source. And we know usually the type of answers. But then we're going to do an assessment. And I think I'd like you to remember 3 things on AI when you assess AI. The first ultimate question, what value does it create? If you don't have value creation, it's useless. Second, what's the cost? If it costs you hundreds of thousands of dollars every year to do an assessment of all the data, ex post, ex analytics, whatever you choose. Is it worth the cost? It's very expensive AI. And third, what is the environmental impact? The environmental impact of AI is huge. It should not be neglected. And before, you had the likes of Microsoft and Cisco and Meta. They were talking about green AI. No one is talking about it anymore. And public information is available on Microsoft decommissioning or recommissioning nuclear plants in order to have stable energy for their servers. Some countries will say that nuclear is sustainable. Some countries will say it's not. It's not the point. The point is, what is the impact? So I think it's important on value creation, environmental impact, and cost that you should look at. AI has huge potential, but we should not forget it's developed by humans. And it should help humans to make decisions. But we should make sure that the impact that we are looking for is creating me value, and it will not cost me millions of dollars per year. So when we look at clean energy project, yes, there is potential, but those three questions should always be asked to make sure that whatever we come up with is going to reinforce my decisions, and it's going to make this investment a return on investment. But again, sustainability, we need to talk about the environmental impact. And nuclear power, it's not available everywhere. And AI, it's going to come on the cloud. And therefore, what are your laws when it comes to data sovereignty? Can the data go out of the country, or everything has to stay inside? When we talk about infrastructure, is it categorized as secret defense type of data? That's why the more you dig, and the more you realize what are the options, it's not that simple. And then some people will say, oh yeah, but we can take a module of AI and implement it into your servers. Yes, it's possible. We are discussing with Indonesia to do what we call containerization. Containerization is a responsibility of the government to maintain the server, to secure the server, to update the server, and to upgrade the servers. It's not a simple task, and it's an expensive task. So I think that if we want more and more to use new tools like AI, cloud option is not an option anymore. And that's going to be interesting to see where we're going to go as a group of countries if we're going to be able to go through that process. But sovereign cloud, very tough, limited to a few countries.
Thank you, Christophe.